I should have known something was off the moment I stepped into the house. An eerie silence hung in the air, a stark contrast to the usual bickering between my husband Connor and his son Alex. Instinctively, I moved closer to the study, the voices becoming clearer with each step. "It's the perfect solution. She'll never suspect a thing." Connor's muffled tone resonated, laced with an unsettling smugness. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the door, Alex's voice joining the sinister exchange. "You're certain this poison will work gradually? I don't want her dying too quickly before we can access those assets." I gasped, clapping a hand over my mouth to muffle the sound. My mind whirled, struggling to process the unthinkable words they had uttered, a heinous plot against my very life. The doorknob twisted and I scrambled away, my breath catching in my throat as Connor emerged. His eyes narrowed slightly at my presence before a sickening smile stretched across his lips. "There you are, dear. Alex and I were just discussing some business matters." Lies dripped from his forked tongue like venom as Alex slinked out behind him, his reptilian gaze sizing me up like a prize to be claimed. "Is everything all right?" Connor asked with feigned concern, placing a clammy hand on my shoulder. "You look a tad pale." I swallowed hard, mustering every ounce of composure to disguise the maelstrom of emotions raging within me. Fear, anger, disbelief, they swirled together in a toxic concoction, threatening to spill over with the slightest provocation. "I'm fine," I lied through gritted teeth, offering a tight-lipped smile that concealed the churning turmoil. "Just feeling a bit lightheaded, that's all." Connor's brow furrowed with mock worry as he ushered me towards the kitchen. "Why don't you sit down and have some water? I'll whip up something for you to eat." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as his words took on an insidious new meaning. Was this the beginning of their twisted scheme? Would they truly stoop so low as to poison me, their own family, for financial gain? I watched in tense silence as Connor busied himself at the counter, his movements almost mocking in their nonchalance. A glance towards Alex revealed his eyes fixated on me, a sinister glint dancing within their depths like a predator eyeing its defenseless prey. In that moment, a fire ignited within me, a fierce, uncompromising blaze that would not be extinguished. I would not be the victim in this twisted tale. I would be the architect of their undoing. Gripping the glass of water, I met Connor's gaze with an unwavering stare as he approached. A silent challenge burned in my eyes, one he seemed oblivious to in his arrogance. "Drink up, sweetheart," he cooed, that sickening smile never faltering. "You'll be feeling better in no time." As I raised the glass to my lips, a single thought crystallized with resolute clarity. If it was war they wanted, it was war they would get, and I would show no mercy in dismantling their vile scheme piece by wretched piece until justice and retribution were finally served. In the days that followed, I became a silent observer, my ears pricked for any shred of information that could aid my cause. Connor and Alex seemed to carry on as usual, their facade of normalcy only strengthening my resolve. It was Eva, my dearest friend, who provided the first glimmer of hope. Over coffee one afternoon, I finally confided in her about the harrowing conversation I'd overheard, the words tumbling out in a torrent of anger and disbelief. Her eyes widened with horror, but her resolve never wavered. "We need to gather evidence, Lila, build an airtight case against those snakes." I nodded, the first twinges of purpose igniting within me. Eva was right. I couldn't simply confront them without proof. I needed ammunition, and I needed it fast. That evening, I took stock of our finances with renewed scrutiny. Missing funds, suspicious transactions, hidden debts, the trail of deceit woven by Connor and Alex gradually revealed itself bit by bit. "You seem awfully focused on those statements," Connor remarked over dinner, his tone laced with artificial nonchalance. "Anything interesting?" I met his gaze levelly, unwilling to betray the hatred simmering beneath the surface. "Just doing a little financial housekeeping." His brows rose in mock surprise before he shrugged, returning his attention to the meal before him, the very picture of apathy towards my growing suspicion. In the ensuing weeks, I became a master of deception, feigning illness while meticulously cataloging every illicit transaction, every underhanded move made by those snakes. All the while, I leaned on Eva, her steadfast support and strategic counsel proving invaluable. "We're getting closer," she assured me one evening as we pored over the mounting evidence. Soon, we'll have everything we need to bring them down. Connor's smug indifference only added fuel to the fire burning within me. Did he truly believe I was some wilting flower, too feeble and foolish to unravel his tangled web of lies? He was gravely mistaken. It was Alex, however, whose malice truly sent tendrils of ice through my veins. I witnessed firsthand the contemptuous glares he aimed my way, the undisguised loathing simmering in those cold, dead eyes. "Better watch your back," he muttered under his breath as he brushed past me in the hallway one day. "Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen." The pointed remark was a harsh reminder of the venom coursing through their veins, a poisonous hatred that threatened to consume us all if left unchecked. But I was no fragile victim to be cowed by such thinly veiled threats. I was a woman reborn, fueled by a thirst for justice too long denied. With Eva's help, I would tear down the facade of lies they'd so carefully constructed, exposing the rot that festered at their very core. One by one, I would dismantle their lives, just as they had aimed to destroy mine. It was only a matter of time before the depraved depths of their betrayal came to light. And when that day arrived, I would be waiting, not with fear, but with the cold, hard promise of retribution. With each passing day, I immersed myself deeper into the role fate had cruelly thrust upon me, that of the overlooked, ailing wife. It became a twisted charade, one that allowed me to secretly advance my plans while flying completely under Connor and Alex's radar. "You're looking particularly pale this morning," Connor observed over breakfast one morning, his tone a perverse blend of faux concern and undisguised indifference. I offered a weak smile, feigning a weariness that would soon become my reluctant ally. "Just feeling a bit drained lately." His gaze drifted back to his plate with a dismissive shrug. "Well, you'd better rest up. We've got the Benson event this weekend, and I can't have you embarrassing me in front of potential clients." The words oozed with thinly veiled condescension, but I bit back the torrent of rage bubbling within me. Antagonizing him would only undermine the delicate fiction I was so carefully crafting. In the days that followed, I allowed myself to grow increasingly lethargic, my movements slowing to a sluggish crawl that couldn't be mistaken for anything other than infirmity. "Christ, you look like death warmed over," Alex sneered as I shuffled into the living room, sinking onto the couch with a weary sigh. Mustering what little energy I could, I leveled him with a pointed glare. "It must be that stomach virus going around." His expression morphed into one of poorly concealed disdain before he rose from his chair, muttering a parting remark too vile to repeat as he stalked away. With him gone, I allowed the mask to slip, my lips curling into a grim smile. If only he knew the true purpose behind my increasingly haggard appearance, to lull him and his loathsome father into a false sense of complacency. As the weeks ticked by, I turned my attention to securing my assets, meticulously siphoning funds and making arrangements through Eva's trusted network of contacts. A new identity, complete with fresh credentials and a pristine record, would be my safety net when the time came to escape this waking nightmare. "You've got to hang in there," Eva murmured to me during one of our clandestine meetings, her eyes shining with a combination of worry and fierce determination. "We're almost there." I nodded weakly, allowing my body to slump in a semblance of debilitating frailty. "Don't worry about me. Just make sure everything is in place for when the time comes." Her jaw tightened, and she gave a curt nod before rising to leave, the weight of our shared mission heavy between us. With each rattling cough, each tremor that racked my body, I could see Connor and Alex's contempt growing. Their once cutting remarks had given way to stretches of stony silence, punctuated only by the occasional snide glance in my direction. Did they sense the game afoot, or were they simply biding their time, eager to shed the burden of my existence so they could slither away with my hard-earned wealth? The thought was like gasoline on the flames of my hatred, stoking the inferno that would ultimately consume them. Finally, the night before the pivotal Benson event arrived, heralding the next phase of my intricately woven plan. "Well, you certainly don't look fit to attend tomorrow's function," the Connor remarked with an air of poorly disguised annoyance as I took my place at the dinner table. "Maybe it's best you sit this one out, dear. Wouldn't want you to keel over in front of everyone." His lips curved into a serpentine smile, dark amusement dancing in his beady eyes. I allowed my gaze to drift away, feigning a weary capitulation that he no doubt interpreted as weakness. Little did he know, it was the calm before the storm. The final moments of peace before I obliterated his pathetic delusions of control. As the first twinges of nausea blossomed within me, I steadied my quivering hands against the table's edge, steeling my resolve for the trials yet to come. They thought they had broken me, body and spirit, but by dawn's first light, the game would be forever changed, and Connor and Alex would soon discover they had succeeded only in awakening a force more powerful than any they could possibly fathom. With my newfound air of frailty firmly in place, it was time to set the next phase of my plan into motion. Connor and Alex may have thought me a helpless invalid, but they were about to discover just how debilitating their own arrogance could be. It started small. The subtle planting of suspicious evidence designed to make it appear as though Connor was engaged in a tawdry affair. A lingering spritz of unfamiliar cologne, a swirl of red lipstick on his shirt collar, furtive glances and whispered phone calls when he thought no one was watching. At first, the sign seemed to go unnoticed by those snakes. But I was patient, allowing the seeds of doubt to germinate until their poisonous tendrils could no longer be ignored. It was Alex who finally confronted his father, his anger boiling over during a heated argument one evening. "Who is she?" he snarled, slamming his fist on the table with a force that made me start. "Don't even try to deny it. I've seen the evidence." Connor's eyes widened in what I could only assume was feigned shock and bewilderment. "What the hell are you going on about, boy?" The lipstick stains, the hushed phone calls. Alex's voice dripped with venom as he leaned across the table, his eyes narrowing to slits of pure venom. "You're cheating on us with some cheap whore, aren't you?" The muscles in Connor's jaw twitched as he absorbed the accusation. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw a flash of guilt in those cold, dead eyes. But like any master of deception, the expression was gone in an instant, replaced by one of towering indignation. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" he roared, slamming his palms on the table with enough force to rattle the plates and cutlery. "I've given you everything, a home, an education, a life of luxury, and this is how you repay me?" As the two men descended into a maelstrom of bitter recriminations, I watched in silence, allowing the rift I had so carefully cultivated to deepen and fester. Like a master chemist, I had introduced the volatile elements and stepped back, observing as the inevitable explosion tore them apart. In the ensuing days, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Connor and Alex regarded one another with unveiled hostility, their interactions reduced to terse exchange loaded with thinly veiled accusations. "Where were you until so late last night?" Alex demanded one morning as we sat down to breakfast, his eyes boring into his father with an intensity that would have incinerated a lesser man. "Out with your whore again." Connor slammed his coffee mug down with enough force to slosh the steaming liquid over the rim. "Watch your insolent tongue, boy. You know nothing of the sacrifices I've made to provide for this family." As their quarrel escalated, I found myself tuning out their specific grievances, allowing the general din of enmity to wash over me. Like a composer, I had orchestrated this discordant crescendo through the skilled manipulation of evidence, and the results were even more glorious than I could have imagined. With father and son torn asunder by suspicion and betrayal, the stage was set for the next, more explosive act in my carefully choreographed theater of vengeance. While they postured and snarled, consumed by the flames of manufactured enmity, I bided my time, a silent, unassuming specter merely awaiting her moment to strike. That moment was coming soon. All that remained was to goad the snakes into striking the fateful blow that would ultimately spell their demise. And I knew just the provocation to rattle them from their coils of seething resentment. So I watched and I waited for the perfect opportunity. And when it came, I would be ready to deliver the grand performance of a lifetime. With Connor and Alex's relationship crumbling under the weight of suspicion and hatred I had so expertly cultivated, it was time to deliver the final, decisive stroke that would bring their bitter animosity to an explosive head. The opportunity presented itself one evening as we sat down for a painfully tense family dinner. The atmosphere was thick with resentment, weighted silences punctuated only by the occasional hostile glare or muttered insult exchanged between father and son. Clearing my throat, I adopted my most frail, wilting demeanor as all eyes turned towards me. "I'm afraid I have some distressing news to share." Connor's eyes narrowed to slits of pure venom. "Out with it, then. Don't keep us in suspense." Feigning a tremulous sigh, I twisted my fingers together in a show of profound unease. "It's about the—" I swallowed hard, as if struggling to give voice to some unutterable truth. "The other woman." The words struck like a thunderclap, the air instantly charged with a scorching current of suspicion and fury. Connor shot to his feet, lips peeled back in a wordless snarl of outrage, as Alex leaned forward, eyes glittering with vindicated accusation. "You lying, cheating bastard," the younger man spat, his voice dripping with vitriol. "I knew you had a whore on the side." In one deft motion, I slid a crumpled photograph across the table, one carefully culled from the cache of evidence I had compiled, then artfully staged to capture Connor in a seeming tryst. His brow creased with bewilderment as he snatched it up, only for the expression to contort into one of impotent rage. "This—" He slammed the damning image down with enough force to rattle the tableware. "This is a lie. A twisted, malicious lie." "Is it?" I asked softly, affecting a wounded, almost pleading tone. "Because it would certainly explain your recent indiscretions. The phone calls, the late nights, that strange perfume I've been smelling." Alex was on his feet now, hands balled into white-knuckled fists as he advanced on his father like a coiled serpent. "You smug, self-righteous prick. You've been cheating on us this whole time, haven't you? Carrying on with some two-bit tramp while stringing us along with your lies." It happened in a blur. A flash of movement coupled with an inarticulate bellow of fury as Connor launched himself at his son. The two men collapsed in a tangle of flailing limbs, grunts and curses rent the air as they grappled across the hardwood floor like battling behemoths. I watched, unmoving, as the maelstrom of violence unfolded before me. Let them rend and tear at each other, consumed by the all-devouring flames of hatred I had so carefully stoked within their blackened souls. It was only fitting that I allow them to deliver the fatal wounds that would ultimately seal their demise. At last, Connor managed to pin his son in a chokehold, his teeth bared in a revolting rictus of animalistic fury as Alex's face purpled beneath the onslaught. Revulsion warred with triumph as I observed the spectacle, the gruesome drama playing out exactly as I had orchestrated. Only when it seemed the younger man's eyes would bulge from their sockets did I finally act, fumbling for my phone to hit the record button. Let them have their brutal rematch, their primal showdown of rage and savagery. I would simply sit back and document their sordid performance for posterity. When the dust settled and the violence had finally abated, two battered, heaving combatants glared at each other across the ravaged battlefield of the dining room. Chests rising and falling in ragged desperation, they seemed to realize the depravity of the spectacle they had just enacted. A fractured chuckle, raw and bitter, escaped my lips as I pocketed my phone, the deed accomplished. "Well," I said, my voice steady, despite the turmoil whirling within me like a cyclone of long-suppressed fury. "I'd say the two of you have given me plenty of reasons to revise my will, haven't you?" As their eyes met mine, I saw the first flicker of uncertainty creep across their brutish features. Let them wonder, I thought with grim satisfaction. The game was truly afoot, and there would be no winners, only survivors. In the aftermath of Connor and Alex's explosive clash, a pall of uneasy silence hung over the house like a suffocating shroud. The two snakes seemed chastened in the wake of their primal outburst, slinking through the halls with furtive unease as I remained a specter on the periphery, watching, waiting. It was time to deliver the next punishing volley in my intricately orchestrated downfall. With Eva's assistance, I had already put the necessary pieces in motion to bring this whole sordid affair to its inevitable, karmic conclusion. The first salvo came in the form of an urgent summons from Dr. Harris, our longtime family physician. I arrived at his office feigning a mask of profound frailty, clutching Eva's arm for support as I shuffled inside like a woman treading the precipice of oblivion. "Ah, Lila," the doctor murmured, rising to greet me with solicitous concern etched into his weathered features. "I'm afraid the test results aren't good." My eyes widened with a pantomime of innocent alarm. "What do you mean? What's wrong?" Dr. Harris shook his head, expression grave. "It would appear your condition is more advanced than we initially feared. I'm so very sorry, my dear." The words hung in the air like a stifling miasma weighted with unspoken implications too terrible to fully grasp. Beside me, Eva sagged against my shoulder, overcome with exaggerated emotion as I struggled to maintain my composure. It was all an intricate fiction, of course, a carefully constructed narrative designed to lure Connor and Alex into a state of utterly disarming vulnerability before delivering the coup de grace. Still, I could not resist a flicker of dark satisfaction at the evident torment contorting the doctor's features. Let him marinate in the guilt and misery for now. Soon enough he would learn I had merely engaged him as an unwitting actor in my grand theater of retribution. When Connor and Alex were finally summoned to the office under the pretense of being briefed on my condition, their reactions were a study in callous indifference. While Eva openly wept beside me, their faces remained chiseled masks of stony impassivity, utterly devoid of anything resembling human compassion or empathy. "Well?" Connor prompted, his tone brusque and impatient as he leveled Dr. Harris with an expectant stare. "What's the prognosis, Doc? Out with it." The doctor sighed, rubbing his temples in a show of soul-deep weariness. "I'm afraid the situation is quite dire. The tests indicate that Lila's condition is terminal and progressing far more rapidly than we could have anticipated." A weighted pause lingered in the air as I observed Connor and Alex through shuttered lashes, desperate to drink in their reactions. To my dismay, however, they remained as unreadable and impassive as carved granite monoliths, their expressions utterly inscrutable. Until, that is, the moment I spoke the words that would ultimately shatter their smug facades of indifference. "Given the circumstances," I said, my voice a tremulous whisper that still managed to command the room's attention, "I've decided to amend my will, effective immediately." Connor's head whipped towards me, eyes narrowing to serpentine slits of pure avarice. "Oh, and just what changes did you have in mind, dear?" A tremulous exhalation, punctuated by a sickly, bone-rattling cough that doubled me over, draining what little color remained from my ashen features. When I finally straightened, clutching Eva's arm for support, a muscle twitched in the hinge of Connor's jaw, the barest flickering betrayal of the disquiet roiling within him. "My entire estate," my gaze drifted across them with pointed finality, "is to be awarded to the Wilkinson Charitable Foundation upon my death." The silence that followed was deafening, cavernous, charged with a tension so palpable it seemed to suck the very air from the room. I watched in morbid fascination as the blood drained from Connor and Alex's faces, their complexions taking on the sickly pallor of profound shock. For years they had viewed me as nothing more than a means to an end, a gilded path to wealth and prosperity that could be exploited at their leisure. Now, with the rug so violently swept from beneath their feet, they found themselves disoriented, unmoored, vulnerable, in a way they never could have anticipated. The perfect prelude for my ultimate masterstroke, I mused, savoring their stunned disarray. Just a few more deft maneuvers, and this whole sordid theater would reach its thrilling, cataclysmic climax. In the aftermath of my bombshell revelation regarding the amended will, the atmosphere in our home congealed into a noxious fog of barely contained resentment and desperation. Connor and Alex slunk about the house like feral animals caught in a snare, their movements increasingly erratic and furtive as the days passed. I observed their escalating mania from afar, a silent specter bearing witness as the full weight of their impending loss took root in their blackened psyches. The abuse I had endured, the wounds they had inflicted, all could now be glimpsed in the naked despair marring their once smug countenances. At times their fear and uncertainty would erupt in volcanic paroxysms of unbridled rage, hostile silences shattered by bellowed accusations and furniture-rattling tantrums. When the storms passed, they would inevitably retreat to their respective corners, no doubt scheming new ways to claw back some semblance of control. "You deceitful harpy," Connor raged one morning, slamming his fist on the kitchen counter with enough force to make the plates clatter. "This is your revenge, isn't it? Finally showing your true colors." I met his venom with an impassive stare, my pallid features betraying no reaction as he stalked around the island towards me. Up close, the desperation clinging to his scent was suffocating, underpinned by the sourness of stale whiskey and bitter perspiration. Without a word, I turned and shuffled from the room, every ounce of effort channeled into maintaining my aura of haggard frailty. Let him rage and bluster all he liked. I was beyond the reach of his pitiful intimidation tactics. As my supposed condition appeared to deteriorate further in the ensuing days, Connor and Alex grew only more monstrous in their behavior. Objects were hurled, obscenities screamed with unrestrained virulence. Through it all, Eva remained my steadfast ally, her comforting presence and wise counsel serving as an invaluable bulwark against the maelstrom of toxicity swirling around us. "Stay the course," she murmured one evening as we huddled in the guest room, the muffled shouts of yet another father-son altercation raging beyond the door. "They're coming undone, Lila. You can see it in their eyes." I could indeed, and the realization flooded me with a perverse sort of gratification. For all their feigned indifference and callous disdain, they were merely rapacious vermin scurrying after the crumbs of my hard-earned fortune. Now that the prize had been snatched from their grasping claws, their true wretched natures were being laid bare. It seemed Connor and Alex would stop at nothing to reclaim their coveted windfall, no path too depraved or unethical to traverse. I lost track of the shady associates who began slinking through our doorway at all hours, the heated exchanges punctuated by furtive glances in my direction. At the heart of their desperate scheming, I could see the festering seed of avarice warring with something even more primal, an insatiable, animalistic hunger to reassert their dominance through whatever twisted means necessary. On more than one occasion, I returned from a trip out with Eva to find evidence that they had been rummaging through my affairs, desperation overriding any semblance of discretion. Documents disturbed, jewelry cases left ajar like gaping maws, every inch of my private space violated in their frantic search. Did they truly believe they could find some hidden loophole to circumvent the terms of my will? Or had their madness progressed to such a degree that they would stoop to pillaging my possessions to sate their thirst in the interim? Either way, I recognized their self-destructive flailings for what they truly were: the death rattles of condemned men who simply refused to accept their well-deserved fate. And with every feeble grasping at straws, they only bound themselves tighter in the inescapable noose of karma's brutal recompense. Soon, their options would be well and truly exhausted. Soon, they would have nowhere left to turn, no more depraved avenues left to pursue in their desperate bid for salvation. When that moment of utter defeat and hopelessness dawned, I would be waiting, a merciless specter poised to deliver the death blow that would finally, irrevocably shatter their distorted delusions of entitlement. For now, though, I was content to sit in patient judgment as their world crumbled around them, fueled by the cold certainty that the most exquisite reckonings are often wrought through the unhurried machinations of fate itself. The day of reckoning arrived not with the earth-shattering cataclysm I had halfway anticipated, but with an almost anticlimactic banality. One moment, Connor and Alex seethed before me like two rabid dogs straining at their leashes, their vitriolic threats and obscenities dripping with malice. The next, the door behind me swung open to admit a stern-faced cavalcade of law enforcement officers bristling with grim purpose. "Connor Grayson? Alexander Grayson?" The gruff bark sliced through the volatile miasma like a blade. "You're both under arrest." For a suspended moment, a breath of stunned silence bloomed amidst the chaos. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, pandemonium erupted anew. "This is preposterous." Connor's voice, always so polished and controlled, warped into a guttural rasp of disbelief. "On what grounds?" "Fraud, extortion, attempted murder." The lead detective met my gaze over the pair's shoulders, a silent look of acknowledgement passing between us. "I'm sure the charges will become more extensive as the evidence gets processed." As the harsh realities crystallized in the air with each damning accusation, Connor and Alex seemed to shrink in on themselves. The bluster evaporated, the towering swagger diminished, until they resembled nothing more than a pair of petulant, ill-mannered children caught with their hands in the proverbial cookie jar. "You," Alex hissed, feral eyes swiveling in my direction as he struggled against the restraints being secured around his wrists. "This is your doing, you vindictive bye." The slurring profanity was abruptly swallowed as he was wrenched back, a meaty forearm clamping across his throat to stifle the torrent of vitriol. I watched in silence, unmoved, as father and son were forcibly subdued and frog-marched out of my home in a humiliating tangle of flailing limbs. Their baleful glares scorched my unruffled facade like twin blowtorches of pure, undistilled hatred. But I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, no pity. Only a profound sense of closure, of karmic release, as the toxic presences that had tainted my existence for far too long were finally purged from the premises. When the turmoil of their forced exodus had subsided, Eva emerged from the shadows to rest a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Layla," she murmured, squeezing gently. "You're free of them at last." I nodded, the words hardly registering as the weight of what had transpired finally settled over me in a cascading rush. It was done. The nightmare had been excised, the scales of justice finally balanced through the most deliciously poetic of resolutions. And in the wake of that exquisitely calibrated release, I felt nothing. No soaring elation, no swell of vindicated triumph. Just a yawning, cavernous absence where their malignant influence had once reigned. As the authorities conducted their thorough search, meticulously documenting the mountain of evidence I had so carefully curated over the past weeks and months, the harsh realities of Connor and Alex's crimes were laid bare in exacting detail. From the insidious financial improprieties and fraud all the way through to the most heinous deception of all, their despicable plot to poison me and abscond with my estate. With every passing revelation, I felt a subtle sense of lightness pervade my being, a lifting of the oppressive burdens and torments I had shouldered for far too long. By the time the investigators had finished exhaling their findings and departed with stifling courtroom formalities, I felt utterly untethered, buoyed aloft by an ethereal sense of liberation. Only one matter remained unresolved. When Dr. Harris arrived at the house much later that evening, his features were etched into a mask of harrowed apprehension. In his eyes, I witnessed the gnawing dread of a man ensnared in circumstances far beyond his control, the realization that he had been an unwitting pawn in the grandest of deceptions. His voice cracked under the weight of his turmoil before he drew a steadying breath. "I don't know what to say, Leela, when they told me the truth." Raising a hand, I waved away his concerns with an airy gesture of dismissal. "Think nothing of it, Samuel. You were a means to an end, one I deeply regret having to exploit, but a necessity nonetheless." The doctor's throat bobbed as he absorbed my words, the tension seeming to bleed from his frame with each passing second. "Then it's true?" he asked at last, a glimmer of lucidity piercing the fog of trepidation clouding his gaze. "This was all just an elaborate ruse? A scheme to expose them and their misdeeds?" A faint smile tugged at the corners of my mouth as I rose from my seat, suddenly revitalized and suffused with a renewed sense of purpose and vitality. "A woman's got to protect herself, Samuel. Surely you can understand that." And with those parting words, I swept from the room, shedding the cocoon of frailty and deception to greet the next chapter of my existence, one brilliantly unencumbered and replete with the heady promise of reinvention. After all, I mused as I gazed out over the sun-dappled expanse of my perfectly manicured estate, a new dawn was breaking, and I would be damned if I didn't greet it with open arms, finally unfurled from the shackles of a past I never should have endured.